I used to believe there were limits to how cruel people could be, especially family. But I learned sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. They come from the ones you spent your life loving. It was a rainy Saturday night in Portland, the kind of cold drizzle that clings to your coat and seeps into your bones. I'd taken extra care getting ready, even though I told myself it didn't matter. I wore the same navy blue dress I'd bought for my late husband's retirement dinner 20 years ago. My silver hair was pinned neatly. I'd even splurged on a manicure I couldn't really justify. Tonight was my son's 39th birthday, I thought. Maybe there'd still be a trace of the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and say, "For you, Mum." The restaurant was called The Monarch, one of those places where the lighting is dim, but every surface glows with money, crystal glasses, black-suited servers gliding like shadows. It smelled faintly of truffle oil and citrus. I felt out of place the second I stepped in, clutching my modest purse like it was a lifeline. When the hostess led me to the table, David stood to greet me. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He'd grown into a man who wore tailored suits, like armor, his jaw set, like someone who didn't have time for softness. And then there was Melissa. She was already seated, swirling a glass of deep red wine like it was part of her performance. She was beautiful. I can't lie, sleek blonde hair, pearl earrings that probably cost more than my car. But her eyes were always cold. "Evelyn," she said, giving me one of those smiles that doesn't really mean anything. "Oh, you look nice." Nice. The word dropped between us like a cheap coin. Not elegant, not lovely, just nice. I sat down quietly. I told myself to breathe, to not let her get under my skin. David asked about my apartment, his voice polite, distant. Before I could answer, Melissa interrupted, leaning closer like she was sharing a secret. "Is it true you're still in that... what's it called?" She waved her hand dismissively. "That cramped little place off Pine Street? It must feel so lonely there." I froze, forcing a smile. "It's comfortable," I said simply. Melissa tilted her head. "But don't you ever worry, I mean, living alone at your age? What if you fall? What if..." She trailed off dramatically, then laughed softly. "Well, I guess we all end up alone one way or another, right?" David didn't say a word. I tried to steer the conversation to safer ground. Asked about their work, their plans. David talked about his promotion at the firm. Melissa mentioned their upcoming trip to Napa. I listened, nodding when appropriate, but every comment I made seemed to amuse her. When I mentioned volunteering at the library, she actually laughed. "Oh, that's sweet." She said the word dripping with condescension. "Keeping busy with what story time for toddlers must be nice to have so much free time." I swallowed my pride and sipped my water. I wanted to believe it was just Melissa's way sharp edges, but no real malice. But then the waiter came with the wine list. "We'll have the Silver Oak Cabernet," Melissa announced without even glancing at me. Then she looked up, smiling like a cat. "Unless you'd prefer something more economical. I know things have been tight for you." The table went silent. My cheeks burned. I looked at David, willing him to step in to tell her that was enough. But he just adjusted his cufflinks and avoided my eyes. It was then I realized what this dinner really was. It wasn't about celebrating David. It was a performance, a chance for Melissa to remind me of my place in their carefully curated world. But the breaking point came with dessert. Melissa set down her spoon, dabbed her lips with her napkin, and said almost casually, "David and I were talking about your future. You really shouldn't be living alone, Evelyn. It's not sustainable. There are some lovely assisted living communities with reasonable rates." Her voice was honeyed, but her words were poison. "I'm fine on my own," I said quietly. Melissa smiled wider, leaning in. Sweetheart, let's be realistic. You're not getting any younger. You're in a tiny apartment, probably eating canned soup for dinner. You're going to die poor and alone. Wouldn't it be better to have some dignity in your final years? I felt the words like a slap. I looked at David one last time. He stayed silent. He didn't defend me. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Something quiet, but powerful. I realized I'd been clinging to an illusion that deep down they still loved me the way they used to. But what I saw in Melissa's smile and David's silence was the truth. They thought I was weak. They thought I had nothing. They thought they could write the rest of my story for me. They were wrong. I barely remember driving home that night. The city lights blurred into streaks on the windshield, and my hands felt cold on the steering wheel. When I got back to my little apartment, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. Melissa's words kept replaying in my mind, looping like a cruel song. You're going to die poor and alone. The worst part wasn't her voice. It was David's silence. My son, the boy. I'd worked double shifts for the boy. I'd sacrificed vacations and new clothes and sleep for he'd let her say it. He'd let her tear me apart piece by piece, and he didn't lift a finger. Grief mixed with something heavier. Anger. But underneath it all, clarity. I stood up slowly and walked into my bedroom. The same small room with peeling wallpaper, the one Melissa probably pictured when she said tiny apartment with that little smirk. I knelt down and pulled a metal lockbox from the back of my closet. It had sat there untouched for years, collecting dust. Inside were folders, bank statements, old deeds, letters from the lawyer I'd trusted for decades. Most people would look at my life and see a woman barely scraping by, living modestly because she had no choice. They wouldn't know about the savings my late husband Michael left behind. They wouldn't know about the rental properties tucked away under a management company's name, the stocks Michael bought in the 90s that quietly grew split and grew again. They wouldn't know about Ravenwood, the house I'd inherited from my grandmother and kept rented out for years to fund my quiet, unassuming life. Melissa and David certainly didn't know, and that had been intentional. I'd chosen to live simply after Michael died, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted to see my family for who they really were when they thought I had nothing. I'd hoped, prayed that David would still choose kindness, that Melissa's charm wasn't just a thin coat of paint over pure ambition. But now there was no doubt. I closed the lockbox and sat at the edge of my bed, my decision forming as naturally as a breath. If they wanted to see me as poor and powerless, I'd let them. I'd let them keep believing they held the upper hand. I would smile, nod play the fragile old woman they imagined, and then I would show them who I really was. The next morning, I called Claire Foster, my attorney and oldest friend. She'd been by my side when Michael passed, the one who had helped me organize my finances, the one who knew exactly how much I truly had. Claire, I said when she answered, I think it's time to make some changes. There was a pause on the line. Evelyn, you sound different. Are you all right? I'm fine. I said, calm but firm. I just need to update my will, and I need to start looking at properties. Something special. Something I can build a new life in. Claire didn't ask for details. She'd always trusted me to explain when I was ready. That week, I visited properties up and down the Oregon coast. I told Melissa I was just keeping busy with errands when she called out of obligation. She didn't press for details, probably too busy planning her next winery tour. But while she was sipping overpriced champagne, I was standing in front of Ravenwood House for the first time in years. The ivy-covered estate was even more beautiful than I remembered. Slate roof, old oak trees, a porch, wide enough to hold a dozen rocking chairs. It smelled faintly of salt from the ocean beyond the cliffs. The house radiated quiet strength, like it was waiting for someone to love it again. When the realtor unlocked the door, I felt something shift inside me. I walked through the empty rooms and pictured myself reading in the sunroom, planting roses in the back garden, hosting real friends, not people who saw me as a burden. I pictured what it would feel like to stand in a space that was mine, not as an afterthought, but as a declaration. I turned to the realtor. "Full asking price," I said. "Cash. Let's do it." Her eyes widened and she stumbled over her words. Would you like to negotiate or—" "No," I said. "No negotiations. I want it." By the end of the week, Ravenwood was mine. Melissa didn't even notice I'd been quiet for days. David sent a brief text, something about work, keeping him busy. Fine. Let them ignore me. Let them think I was fading quietly into the background. They had no idea the game had just changed. 3 weeks after I signed the papers, Ravenwood felt like mine in every sense. I'd already moved a few of my favorite things into the house, Michael's old leather chair, a faded photograph of my parents on their wedding day, and a handful of books I couldn't live without. The house breathed differently now. In the mornings, sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors. At night, you could hear the ocean faint and steady beyond the trees. It was peaceful in a way my tiny apartment never could be. I hadn't told David or Melissa. Not yet. I wanted them to see it for themselves. It started with a simple phone call. Mum David's voice sounded distracted, like he was calling between meetings. Melissa and I were thinking of coming by this weekend, just to catch up. I almost laughed. 3 weeks of silence. Then suddenly they wanted to catch up. "Of course," I said calmly. "Saturday would be perfect. I'll text you the address." There was a brief pause. "The address?" "Yes," I said. "I'm not at the apartment anymore." I moved. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "You moved? We're just a little place I found out by the coast. You'll see." I hung up before he could ask anything else. On Saturday afternoon, their sleek black SUV wound up the long gravel driveway. I watched from the front porch as Melissa stepped out first, her heels clicking on the stone path. She'd dressed for the occasion, cream-coloured blouse, gold jewellery, and that air of effortless superiority she wore like perfume. David followed, looking around with thinly veiled surprise. "This is quite a place," he said, his eyes scanning the tall windows and the wraparound porch. Melissa didn't bother hiding her curiosity. "Mum," she said, her voice bright and fake, "this is stunning. How on earth did you—" She stopped herself, glancing back at David. I smiled faintly. "Would you like a tour?" Inside the house felt even grander. The foyer opened into a living room with a stone fireplace, and beyond that, the sunroom glowed with late afternoon light. I watched their faces as they walked through each space. Melissa's eyes flicked over the details: crown moulding marble countertops, original hardwood floors. I could practically see her mentally placing her designer furniture in each room. "This kitchen," she said, running her fingers along the granite island. "It's perfect, isn't it?" I said, pouring coffee. "And the upstairs?" she asked, her tone casual but eager. 6 bedrooms, I said. 4 baths. Melissa turned to David with a little smirk, as if they'd just stumbled on buried treasure. "It's exactly the kind of home we've been dreaming about," she said softly. David nodded slowly. "Yes, it really is." Then he looked at me. "Mum? This must have cost a fortune." "It was a fair price," I said simply. Melissa laughed lightly. "Well, however you managed it, it's wonderful. And honestly, she added, her eyes sparkling with calculated sweetness, it makes so much sense. This would be a perfect family home. Family home, I asked, though I already knew where this was going. Yes, she said, stepping closer like she was sharing a secret. Think about it. You've got all this space you don't really need. And David and I... She paused for effect. We've been talking about starting a family soon. This house. It's ideal. The nursery could go in that sunny room upstairs, and the yard is perfect for kids. You wouldn't have to be alone anymore. We could all live here together. It would be efficient. Efficient. Like I was a logistical problem to solve. David added quickly. It really would make things easier for everyone. You'd have help with the upkeep. And the stairs, they're not exactly safe for someone your age. Melissa smiled, pressing the advantage. You'd still have your space, of course. Maybe the master suite. We could take the rooms at the end of the hall. It would be so nice for the baby to grow up with their grandmother right there. Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes were already claiming the place. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. We continued the tour, Melissa asking loaded questions. Do you plan on keeping the original floors? Have you considered new appliances, as though she were already the one in charge? David trailed behind, nodding along, clearly imagining himself hosting backyard barbecues and holiday dinners in my home. When we reached the upstairs balcony, Melissa stepped out to admire the view of the ocean. This could really be something special, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Then she turned, smiling, that sharp little smile. And you wouldn't have to worry about being here alone anymore. We'd take care of everything. Take care of everything. They thought this house was theirs already. They thought I'd hand over the life I'd built, the independence I'd reclaimed, just because they decided it was convenient. I smiled, then a real smile they didn't understand. That's an interesting idea, I said lightly. Melissa's smile widened, triumphant. I knew you'd see it that way. I glanced out at the ocean, letting the silence stretch. Inside, I felt something solidify. Let them dream. Let them plan. Let them taste the victory they thought was theirs. They had no idea what was coming. It didn't take long for them to circle back. By Wednesday, David called again. His voice carried that same forced casualness, like he was testing the waters. Mom, Melissa and I were thinking, maybe we could talk more about the living arrangement we mentioned. You know, making Ravenwood a true family home. I let the pause stretch just long enough. Sure, I said. Why don't you come over Saturday afternoon? We'll talk about everything. I could practically hear the relief in his voice. Perfect. I'll let Melissa know. Chin. To Saturday arrived crisp and clear, the autumn sun, catching the gold in the leaves. I set out a tray of coffee and pastries in the sunroom. Everything about the house looked warm and inviting, but beneath it all was a razor-sharp clarity. Today the masks were coming off. They arrived exactly on time. Melissa breezed in first, wearing a tailored navy dress and carrying a folder. She always came prepared, like she was presenting a case to a jury. David followed, looking polished but tense. This place really is spectacular, Melissa said as she glanced around the sunroom. It's got so much potential. I gestured to the chairs. Please sit. They did, Melissa, placing her folder neatly on the coffee table, her eyes glittering with a quiet sort of triumph. So we were thinking, she began, it makes sense for us to move in sooner rather than later. With the baby coming. She glanced at David, who nodded, though his eyes flickered with a hesitation I hadn't seen before. Baby, I asked, though I already suspected this was another strategic move. Melissa smiled sweetly, resting a hand on her flat stomach. We haven't announced it yet, but yes, we're expecting. 3 months along. We thought it would be such a beautiful way to start this new chapter as a family right here in Ravenwood, David added quickly. It just feels like the right thing to do. You'd have help, we'd have the space we need, and when the time comes, well, it would all belong to the family anyway. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Belong to the family? Melissa tilted her head like I'd asked something silly. Well, of course. I mean, you won't need all of this forever, and it's only natural for David to inherit the house. This way, we'd save everyone the hassle later. Save everyone the hassle? I smiled faintly. That's an interesting assumption. Melissa frowned slightly but pushed forward. Look, Evelyn, we're trying to make this easier for you. You don't have to manage this big place alone. We can take over the renovations, the landscaping, everything. You can stay here with us. Think of it as us taking care of you. And in return, I asked quietly. Melissa blinked, caught off guard. In return, you'd have peace of mind. And your grandchild would grow up knowing their grandmother? Isn't that what you want? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a folder, sleek black leather. I placed it on the coffee table, sliding it toward them. What's this? David asked. Since we're talking about family and the future, I said calmly, I think you should see something. Melissa opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. I watched her face as the color drained. David leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. His brows furrowed. This is... He flipped to the second page. This is your will? Yes, I said. Updated just last month. Melissa's voice was tight. It says you've left everything to some charity, the Haven Circle. What is this, a non-profit? I said. They help elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. People like me. David looked up, stunned. Mum, you can't be serious. You're cutting me out completely. Yes, I said simply. Melissa let out a sharp laugh, disbelieving. This isn't legal. You can't just disinherit your only son. There are laws. There are laws about coercion. I interrupted softly. About manipulation. But there are no laws requiring me to reward cruelty. David's face flushed. Cruelty, Mom? That's not fair. We were just trying to help you. Help me. My voice rose just slightly, by suggesting I move into assisted living, by telling me I'd die poor and alone, by sitting there and saying nothing while she tore me apart. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Melissa's mask slipped completely. You're being dramatic. We were trying to be practical. Look at you living alone, barely making ends meet. We were offering you security. And this is how you repay us, by throwing away your family for a bunch of strangers. I looked at her calm, but unyielding. Family isn't about what you can take from each other. It's about love, freely given. You and David made it very clear what you value. And it wasn't me. David's voice cracked. Mom, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about your grandchild. Melissa snapped. Don't beg her. She's just a bitter old woman clinging to control. Let her rot in this house alone. She'll regret it when no one's here to take care of her. I smiled, then the kind of smile that didn't need words. Read the last page, I said. Melissa flipped through angrily, then froze. Her eyes widened. If either of you contests the will, I explained you forfeit the right to even set foot on this property. Ever. The courts will enforce it, so you won't inherit it. You won't live here. And you won't use my life as a safety net. Silence. Melissa's face twisted in fury. You're pathetic, she spat. And you'll die that way, alone with no one to even notice. I looked at her. Really looked at her. No, Melissa. I'll die on my terms. With peace. and with the knowledge that my home will give life to people who actually need it. David stared at the floor, his hands trembling. "Mom, please." "There was always a way to fix this," I said quietly. "But you chose not to." Melissa stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. "We're done here." She stormed toward the door. David hesitated for a moment, looking at me like he wanted to say something, but then followed her out. I watched their car disappear down the driveway, the ocean beyond, calm and endless. Inside, the silence felt liberating. They didn't even make it to the end of the driveway before the yelling started. Through Ravenwood's tall windows, I could hear Melissa's voice, sharp and cutting, echoing off the stone walls outside. "I told you she'd be impossible," she hissed. "You said she'd listen. You said she owed you." "I didn't know she'd do this," David muttered, his voice low but strained. She's never been like this before." Melissa's laugh was harsh. "Oh, please. She's always been like this, weak, needy. And now suddenly she wants to play queen of the castle. She's humiliating you on purpose. And you just sat there like a child, begging." "Melissa, stop," David said. But there was no authority in his tone, only exhaustion. "No, I won't stop," she snapped. "You let her do this. You let her cut us out of everything. Do you realize what this means? No house, no inheritance, nothing for the baby. How are we supposed to keep up this lifestyle without her safety net?" There was a pause. Then David's voice, quieter. "I thought you married me for me, not for her money." Silence. A heavy, damning silence. Then Melissa said, cool and measured, "I married you for the life you promised me, and you just watched it slip away. If you can't even control your own mother, then maybe you're not the man I thought you were." I saw their SUV pull away, tires crunching angrily over the gravel. I stood there a long while after they were gone, staring at the place they'd stood. I didn't hear from them for weeks. There were no calls, no texts, not even the obligatory "How are you" messages David usually sent when Melissa reminded him. The silence was louder than anything they could have said. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. The world around me started to feel lighter. Ravenwood blossomed into something alive. I filled the rooms with fresh flowers, opened the windows to let the ocean breeze roll through. Neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves, kind people, curious about the new woman in the old estate. I even hosted a small coffee morning for the local community group, filling the house with laughter that had been missing for too long. Meanwhile, I heard whispers through mutual acquaintances. Melissa had been furious. She told anyone who would listen that I'd lost my mind and was throwing away family for strangers. But her carefully crafted social facade was cracking. One evening, I got a call from Claire. "I thought you should know," she said gently. "Melissa's been consulting a divorce lawyer. It seems things aren't good between her and David." I closed my eyes. I wanted to feel pity, but all I felt was the quiet inevitability of it all. Melissa was never in this for love. She was in it for what she thought she could gain, and when the gain disappeared, so did her loyalty. Two months later, I saw David's name flash on my phone. "Mum," he said when I answered, his voice smaller than I remembered. "Melissa left." I sat down, letting the words settle. "She said she can't do this anymore," he continued. "She said she won't be tied to someone who can't provide what she deserves. She terminated the pregnancy." His voice cracked on the last word. "She said it wasn't worth it." I felt a wave of sorrow, not for Melissa, but for the grandchild I'd never meet, and for the son who was finally seeing what I'd seen all along. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "It's my fault," he whispered. I let her talk me into things I didn't even believe. I thought I was protecting us, but I was just protecting her. There was a long silence. "Can I come see you?" he asked finally. "Just me. No expectations, no anything. I just want to talk." I didn't answer right away. I thought of the years of quiet sacrifices, the dinners where I bit my tongue the night at the Monarch, when he let Melissa humiliate me without a word. But I also thought of the boy who used to bring me dandelions, the boy who'd needed me once. "Yes," I said at last. "Come by tomorrow afternoon." That night, I walked out onto the back porch of Ravenwood. The garden was lit by soft string lights I'd put up for the neighborhood gathering. The roses I'd planted weeks ago were starting to bloom. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Melissa was gone, and David was finally stripped bare of the illusions he'd built around her. He was coming to me not for money, not for comfort, but because he'd finally hit the bottom of his pride. What he would do with that humility, I didn't know yet. But it would be his choice now, not hers. David arrived the next afternoon. I watched from the kitchen window as his black SUV rolled up the drive, but this time there was no Melissa beside him, no carefully curated outfit or practiced smile. He stepped out slowly, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit jacket hung a little loose, his posture hunched. Not the confident corporate lawyer I'd grown used to, but a man who'd been humbled. When I opened the door, he hesitated like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. "Hi, Mum." I studied his face for a moment. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, his hair a little grayer than it should have been at 39. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into the sunroom and stopped. His gaze drifted to the flowers I'd arranged in a vase, the stack of books on the side table, the half-finished painting on the easel. It was like he was seeing the house for the first time, not as a prize, but as something alive. "This place feels different," he said softly. "It feels like home," I replied. "For me." We sat at the same table where I'd handed him the will weeks before. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile now, just heavy with everything that hadn't been said. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Melissa left 3 weeks ago. She said she didn't sign up for a life without comfort, without the future she thought she'd have. She said I was a disappointment." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He nodded, staring down at his hands. I let her convince me that I deserved more, that we deserved more, and I let her twist how I saw you. I knew deep down that what she said to you that night was cruel. But I stayed silent because it was easier than standing up to her. And now... His voice cracked. "Now there's nothing left." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there was still something left, but I stayed quiet. He needed to find his own words. He looked up, finally, his eyes red-rimmed. "I don't blame you for cutting me out of the will. You were right. I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve you." I felt a strange mixture of pain and relief. Pain for the years, lost relief that he finally saw it. "I didn't change the will to punish you, David," I said softly. "I changed it to protect myself. I had to draw a line. You can't keep giving pieces of yourself to people who only see you as what you can provide." He nodded slowly. "I see that now. I didn't before. I thought love was about convenience, about what made life easier. I didn't realize how much I'd stopped loving for the sake of loving." We sat there for a long time in the fading afternoon light. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. "Mum, I know I can't undo what I did. I can't erase how I failed you. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try again. Not for the money, not for the house. Just for us. For what's left." I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the boy who used to press dandelions into my hand with that shy, hopeful smile. "You can visit," I said. "You can come to Ravenwood not as an heir, not as someone who feels entitled, but as my son. That's all I've ever wanted." He swallowed hard and nodded. "I'd like that." After he left, I stood on the porch watching his car disappear down the driveway. The ocean beyond was calm, the sky streaked with gold and pink. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt open. Ravenwood wasn't just a house anymore. It was becoming something new, a place for healing, for second chances, for people who had been lost and wanted to be found again. Spring arrived quietly on the Oregon coast. The roses I planted the day after Melissa left were now in full bloom, their petals a riot of colour against the crisp white siding of Ravenwood. The house smelled faintly of salt and lavender. It no longer felt like a fortress protecting me from the world. It felt like it was finally opening its doors. I spent my mornings walking through the garden with a cup of coffee, greeting the volunteers from the Haven Circle who had begun visiting every week. We were making plans to turn the east wing of the house into a respite space for seniors who'd been left behind, women like me, men who'd outlived their families, people who needed connection more than anything. One afternoon, a small group from the organization gathered in the sunroom. We talked about paint colors, furniture, and schedules. They were kind, warm people. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was adding up to something bigger than the pain I'd endured. And then, slowly but steadily, David started coming by. He never stayed long at first. Just a cup of coffee on the porch, a quiet chat in the garden. He didn't ask about the will, didn't bring up the house. He asked about me, what I was reading, how I liked the new art class I'd started, what kind of roses I was planting. He helped fix a loose shutter one weekend, and the next, he showed up with a box of old family photos he'd dug out of storage. It was awkward at times. There were still long pauses, moments when we both didn't know what to say. But there was also laughter again, tentative but real. One Sunday, he came by with a small bouquet of wildflowers. He handed them to me with a shy smile, like the boy he used to be. I thought these would look nice in the kitchen. I placed them in a jar on the windowsill. "They do," I said softly. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said, "I know I'll never be the son you deserved, but I want to be the son you can still be proud of." I turned to look at him. Really, look at him. David being proud of you was never the problem. It was you forgetting who you were. Don't do that again. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't." Later that evening, I stood on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the distance, the ocean shimmered, endless and calm. Behind me, Ravenwood glowed with soft, light laughter from the volunteers still lingering in the halls. I realized then that Melissa had been wrong. I wasn't going to die poor and alone. I was going to live surrounded by something richer than money, by kindness, by choice, by people who saw me for more than what I could give them. David still had a long way to go. We both did. But maybe we could rebuild, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of a love worth having. And if he couldn't, I would still be okay. Because I'd finally learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them. And I had chosen my family now. Sometimes the harshest truths don't come from strangers, but from the people we thought would always protect us. Evelyn's journey reminds us that silence in the face of cruelty is its own betrayal, and that family isn't defined by blood, but by respect, love, and how we choose to show up for one another. It teaches us that self-worth cannot be determined by how others see us, and that reclaiming your dignity, even if it means walking away from those who can't or won't value you, is an act of quiet courage. There's a certain kind of strength in letting people reveal who they truly are and then deciding who deserves a place in your life. And sometimes, in protecting yourself, you create space for real healing, even for those who once failed you. This story isn't just about revenge or justice. It's about choosing peace over bitterness, boundaries over obligation, and building a legacy that reflects your true values, not someone else's expectations. What about you? Have you ever had to distance yourself from toxic relationships, even when it was painful? How did it change your perspective on family love or self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this lesson touched you, hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see ourselves and the people around us. Thank you for spending this time with me. May you always find peace after the storm.